Be smart, it's your money.
The Confident Homeowner with Matt Dabara.
All right, and welcome back to the Confident Homeowner Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Dabara, the Undercover Contractor. Today, I have with me two very special guests, one of which predominantly represents homeowners and the other predominantly contractors. Now, the unique twist on this episode is that they both have experience on both sides of the fence. So with me today, I have Gerald Malanga of LML Law Group, who primarily represents homeowners, and I have Steven Lovett of the law offices of Steven R. Lovett, who predominantly represents contractors. Gerald, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, Matt.
So tell us a little bit about kind of your background, your experience.
I started practicing law in '93, and just because of the firm I was at, I wound up representing subcontractors on behalf of claims brought, defending their insurance through their insurance companies. And I started out with small tradesmen, moved up to general contractors, specialty contractors. And I'll be honest with you, about 8 years into it, I got really sick of towing the company line and doing what the insurance companies said, and basically, dissing these homeowners and saying, you don't have a claim, or if you do, we're going to pay you a few pennies on the dollar. And it didn't sit well with me. And then eventually in '99, I left to go out on my own. And in 2006, started LML. And we've been representing 90% of the time homeowners, commercial owners, and we also do some representation of contractors and developers, but primarily either residential homeowners or commercial owners.
I love it. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we're really excited to have you on the show.
Thanks.
Steven,
Yes, sir.
how'd you end up representing contractors? What's the backstory here?
All right. Well, I've been doing this for a little over 40 years. And I represent contractors in terms of mechanics lien issues and stop notice issues that they may have. I represent a lot of design professionals, architects, and engineers. And I represent some homeowners as well. And essentially, what I found, I've been a Southern California super lawyer for construction since 2013, and I just found out through 2022. And I've written books and edited a book on construction law. And basically what happened is that I would get these horror stories from contractors, and I probably 8 out of 10 of the contractors that come to my office with a home improvement contract it's non-complying. The legislature has drafted a home improvement law since 1978, and they've tried to get contractors to buy into it. Some contractors do to some extent, but the problem is that several years ago you probably know about this, they had something called an HIC certification, where contractors had to take a test to know about home improvement law, and they eliminated that certification and just put it on the regular contractor exam, which means that new people coming in will learn this stuff, but the established contractors don't necessarily know it. And it's a big problem.
I love that. I love that. Now, what do you see on the homeowner side? And the main goal for this episode is because both of our guests here are on both sides of this. And if you know me well enough, you know that as a contractor and both as a homeowner, I have perspectives on both. The goal is to open up this discussion to kind of some of the do's and don'ts and what we see. For your end, Gerald, what do you see on the homeowner side where they typically tend to maybe overlook some signs of a poor contractor, or in my word, I like to use unethical, right?
Sure.
I think that anybody who's going out there and working, is somebody who's trying to do things right. So I use the word ethical and unethical. So for an unethical contractor, what do you see where homeowners typically fall short?
Well, I think Steven hit on it, which is the home improvement contract. A lot of contractors come at you with non-compliant documents. They're charging time and material, which is not allowed on a home improvement contract. They are taking too much of an advance payment on a contract, and it can be a huge payment that they take. They're dealing with folks who are underinsured or uninsured, which is a big problem down the road. And generally, I don't know if they're ethical or unethical. I think contractors who, and frankly, any businessman who's facing some financing issues and cash crunches. The big problem I find with contractors is they're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and they just can't get your job done, and they start putting a lot of pressure on you. I need you to pay. I need you to pay. What they're doing is they're using your money to finish another job, and they're counting on a future job to fund yours. And that always leads to a disaster.
Is there a certain job size or job type that you see is pretty typical for a homeowner to say, this is a mess, I need your help?
I represent parties who are doing kitchen remodels to folks who are building, 8,000 square foot homes. So no one is immune to, the problems they can face with their contractor.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Now, Steven, do you see when a contractor ends up in a dispute, what are some of the areas where, you're representing a contractor and you say to yourself, well, this contractor more or less did everything right? I mean, what are some of the areas where you see that a homeowner didn't operate in the best of ways?
Well, the most important thing I tell everybody is CYA, cover your ass.
Yeah.
And I don't care what you do for a living, lawyer, doctor, Indian chief, you have to do that. So contractors have to wear the white hat and follow the law. I don't think it's a question of unethical, because there's ethical contractors who are just uneducated and don't know what they're supposed to do, number one. For example, and we both talked about the home improvement laws. They provide that there has to be a fixed price contract, not cost plus. They provide that you cannot get paid before you do the work. So for example, somebody can't say, give me 10 grand so I can go and get materials. It's done commonly, but you can't do that under the law. So it's good for contractors to know that, but it does put an economic strain on that. A home improvement contract is typically between 7 and 10 pages with all sorts of warnings to the homeowner and a lot of other things. Also, I've had a lot of contractors come to me and say, hey, they were just friends, so I didn't get anything in writing. Happens all the time. Big problem, because the contract has to be in writing, has to have specific buzzwords, can't be any oral change orders. The change order form has to be in the contract. An issue that comes up a lot is whether or not a contractor has abandoned a project. And I always tell, if the homeowner thinks that the client is abandoned the project, and they have to say, okay, you've got 10 days to come back. And I tell the contractors similarly that if they've been terminated, they should put that in writing so that somebody then doesn't make a claim on their contractor's license bond or accuse them of abandoning the project. Those are the main areas. Another area that comes up a lot is contractors sometimes, it's typically called in, lay people would say using somebody else's license. But what happens, there's actually agencies, I just discovered that link responsible managing officers with licenses to people who don't have a license and want to be contractors.
Wow.
The problem with that is that the responsible managing officer is obligated to put in a lot of time managing the project and supervising. And if it's a guy who has 3 or 4 other companies under him, he's not doing that. So if it turns out that the responsible managing officer is bogus, then the contractor can be treated as an unlicensed contractor. That's a big problem, because under the Business and Professions Codes, there's something called disgorgement. So not only can an unlicensed contractor not sue for his services, it can't lien, can't bring an action, but the homeowner can sue them and get disgorgement, which means all of their money back.
Wow. So I'm sure you guys are aware of this, but 2020 consumer complaints, the number 2 complaint was home improvement contracting work. Second to automotive repairs. So the goal, I think, for the homeowners listening is to we're going to cover some gold nuggets that both help them hold the ethical contractors to a higher standard. What do you think, in both of your opinions, and we'll start with you, Gerald, is what do you think is why do you think we're in this situation? I mean, what do you see going wrong? I mean, how is it number 2 on the consumer complaints, the second most expensive purchase the average American makes? So first purchase is their home, Second most expensive purchase is the maintenance of the home over the next 10 or 20 years. So we're talking about a big thing here. We're talking about a huge issue across the country. We're talking about a lot of money, and we're talking about a lot of people involved. What do you see as kind of the root cause for all of this?
Just a lack of knowledge and education. Homeowners all intend to go into these jobs with best intentions, and I think the contractors do as well. And the interests diverge at some point, and very few contractors that I know in relation with their homeowners at the end of the day can say they've had a good relationship. They leave enemies, and that's not the way it should be. You should have a long-lasting relationship where if you need repairs or you want to recommend them to a friend, I mean, that's the way it should go. But I think that people are ignorant to what they're supposed to do, and had they known, things would have gone much smoother. Particularly, and you need to have communication. You need to be able to, call your contractor, let them know you have a concern. The contractor needs to be firm and say, we're going to do a change order. This is going to cost this much more, and I want you to know that up front, so there's no surprises. Because when you start to get into the area of the unknown, then it becomes a tenuous situation and goes south.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've experienced, I mean, I've been on over 4,000 sales meetings, with clients on behalf of my dad's company as a young kid, and then obviously when I took it over. And I guess where I'm going with this is I believe there was a time where there were a lot of blatant scams. It was like, the stuff you'd kind of think about where it's like, they steal your money, or they show up and they, someone starts digging for a minute and they take your money. Are you finding that now it's more genuinely education based and not as much? Because I think that, like, for example, I draw a lot of parallels to the automotive industry. Right. And there used to be, my grandfather was pretty handy with cars, and he told me there was a scam where they would say at a gas station, "Oh, you need oil," and they would pour an empty oil quart in there, and then, they'd pay for that quart, and, the oil was full to begin with. That's an example of like these, what I consider to be like old school scams. Are you finding that now kind of it's more intricate issues and it's not that low hanging fruit because there's an emphasis on the licenses?
My practice, I don't come across much of the, guys with the empty oil can.
Yeah.
I'm dealing more with not complying with plans and specs, or just, misleading the homeowner. I have cases where, someone starts a job on behalf of a homeowner, and 3 months later, they're nowhere to be seen. Everything's delegated to a subcontractor, so they're never on site, and things just go sideways. I have a case I'm dealing with now where an unfortunate homeowner has been bilked for over $5 million on constant, we can do this, or did you ever think of adding this wing? And, the guy just didn't know. And he unfortunately, had a big bank account, and they took a lot of money. It happens to the wealthy. It happens to the uneducated. No one is immune from a bad relation with a contractor, and it doesn't necessarily mean the contractor is unethical. It just means that they're not operating on the same plane.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as you said, I mean, I think it's the emphasis here is around kind of the fact that these aren't if you're just running a license number. I think some homeowners think, hey, if I check their license, I check their insurance, I have a good conversation, I'm good. And I guess what I'm getting at is that the issues, some of the root issues, are much more complex, where a relationship could be good and another project the contractor is doing goes south, and all of a sudden they're put in this tight situation, or there's all sorts of root causes where a heightened level of awareness and education are crucial.
Right. And dialogue, and, making sure plans and specs are followed, because what I do, the big part of my practice is not dealing with course of construction, but after construction, where we've got water pouring in or homes moving down a hillside. But in terms of, day to day dealing with a contractor, it's no different than any other relation. You need to have dialogue and review your documents and make sure that things are proper, and that you're dealing with a reputable guy. And you can't tell what's in someone's heart, but you can tell if they've finished projects in the past, have they delivered, and, you got to go with that.
Yeah. Steven, what do you think is the root issue for this being kind of number 2 on consumer complaints? What do you think it all comes down to?
Well, I think that the legislature's got the laws, but nobody knows about them. I think the Contractors Board has not done a fundamentally good job of educating its contractors. I mean, contractors can go to a store and buy complying home improvement contracts, but then sometimes they'll use the same contract for 20 years and the laws change and the contracts don't. So that's a big problem. The other problem is people don't do their due diligence, even though they're spending tens of thousands of dollars. All you have to do is go to the Contractors Board website, which is www.cslb.ca.gov. And if they click on consumer, they'll see all of these guidelines on what they should look for. And there's even what you should look out for in home improvement contracts if that's what you're doing. Right now, the big thing is ADUs and garage conversions. And then things like Yelp and checking out reviews. In the old days, I used to tell people to get references. You don't have to do that anymore. Check out Yelp reviews and see how favorable the contractor is being evaluated before you hire them. And in answer to your question, I think most of the time it's not scam artists. However, I had a case where I would call it a contractor from hell. This guy did virtually everything that he could wrong, including stealing materials from one project and taking them to another. Fortunately for my client, he had insurance involved, and my client pretty much got made whole. But you have to be very careful who you deal with. I don't care if it's a contractor, lawyer, or anybody. Do your due diligence.
Who's looking out? One of the I'm really excited for this episode. I mean, this is awesome because I wanted to get kind of both of these perspectives. Who do we feel like, and I guess I'll ask you first, Steven, who do we feel like is genuinely looking out for the homeowner? Because what I advocate, right? The reason I call this the Confident Homeowner Podcast is because I want to create confident homeowners. And I believe the way to do that is by way of education. It dawned on me that I have construction friends in every industry. I've got electricians, plumbers, you name it. And I asked the plumber, I said, hey, if you were going to build an addition on your house, being a plumber, would you have any fear in hiring a contractor? He goes, of course not. What are you, crazy? Even though it's not his respective industry. Same thing with the electrician. I asked him the same question. He goes, no problem. So what do we feel like is, I guess there's a question around, how much education or information a homeowner needs to gain. They sometimes may feel like, well, is it really my responsibility to have to do all of this stuff? I mean, how would you answer that? Do you feel like?
I think that no matter if you're going to go into a contract or agreement and you're going to be spending a lot of money, it's incumbent upon you to do your homework. And I've already talked about going to the Contractors Board website. That can tell you a lot of things. It can tell you your contractor may not have workers' compensation insurance. It can tell you that there may be other complaints against them, which could be a red flag. I'd say from my experience, probably at least 10, 15% of the time, there'll be an ongoing complaint against the contractor, at least one. The Contractors Board is supposed to protect consumers, but they typically don't get involved until it's too late. And then when they do get involved, it takes a real long time before they take any action, if at all. And they try to divert the cases to mediation and arbitration as opposed to having to go after the contractor. And yet I've had circumstances where they go after a contractor and it's really bogus enforcement. So they can kind of go a little overboard sometimes. For example, I had a really reputable roofing subcontractor, and they cited him for 6 problems, 6 violations. And ultimately, I beat all of them. The only one I didn't beat, and it was wrong, it was an apartment building. And they still held that he had to conform with the home improvement law, even though the owner didn't live in the building. And I asked the investigator on cross-examination, have you ever had a case where you cited an apartment building, a contractor working on an apartment building for violation of the home improvement law? He said no, notwithstanding they did do 1 violation out of about 7 or 8, which we beat. So, I mean, it's hit or miss, but again, I think you can't rely upon others protecting you. You should have to protect yourself. And that's what the Contractors Board in theory is for. But as a matter of practice, do your due diligence. And if there's a problem, consult an attorney. Another thing that's really smart to do on a larger project is to avoid disputes and a waste of time. You can have a project mediator appointed. So rather than go to a mediator or arbitrator when you're already off the job 35 days and fighting over money, you can call the guy, make a quick telephone call, and resolve the impasse on the spot and continue with work without missing a beat.
I like that. I like that a lot. I think, and there were so many things in my head there. One of them being that how many of these homeowners are just dissatisfied, where they're like, you know what, I lost, I had to go back and fix this, but I didn't go to an attorney. I didn't contact anybody. I was thinking as you were talking that it's second on the consumer complaints, but that's what we have record of. That's the people that were so mad and so angry. So how many people are like, hey, I lost $5,000 on this deal, or I had to redo this? I mean, I've seen so many. I've seen a street where I did 3 projects and all 3 of them got screwed by the same contractor. Not one of them wrote a bad review. And so I was just thinking about how much this happens. How exposed do you feel like homeowners are in your eyes, Gerald? I mean, how vulnerable are they?
They're very vulnerable. There's no one looking out for them. The Contractor State License Board is supposed to be the watchdog, but like Steven said, it's hit and miss. And yeah, you can look up and see someone, if they're licensed, are they insured? Not even are they insured with general liability. They have workers' comp. You can learn a little bit, but you can't tell whether they do a good job. You can only do that by seeing past projects and speaking to past customers. I would say that anyone looking to hire a general contractor to do, what they consider to be a significant body of work, reach out to a prior client, see what it looks like. Go take a look at their house, even if it's just a drive-by. Because some of the work is horrible. Things are crooked, wood's warping, they're using bad materials, and a lot of homeowners just don't know any better. Frankly, they'll see a poorly executed job and they're happy with it. They don't realize that they really got taken. But yeah, I think we both come back time and again. It's really incumbent on the homeowner to do their homework, check things out, and get a level of confidence that their project's going to move forward the way they want it to.
What's a typical, and you don't have to divulge this information directly, but what would you say is a typical, if a homeowner were to say, all right, well, what's my downside? Meaning if I end up having to end up in a legal dispute, what does that typically cost? How long does it take? How messy is it? If you're a homeowner and you've never had one, like what can they expect to, if you say, hey, a typical case might cost between this and this, it has not necessarily any bearings to what you charge, but what is their downside in this whole equation?
That's a real open question. It depends what they're facing. But if it's someone who, let's say their kitchen remodel went south and they need to chase someone down, they could have lost materials that they purchased. You could run in spending $20,000, $30,000 just to get a lawyer in to help straighten things out. And then if you're dealing with a whole house, sky's the limit. The costs I've seen range from, $100,000 in attorney's fees to several $100,000 to deal with, some pretty significant issues. And they're coming from new construction, from whether it's mass builders, the large national companies, flippers who are getting in and getting out, guys building what we call the McMansions. Some of them are very well built. Some are just a nightmare.
And duration, I mean, some of these cases might take, a quick one versus one that
a quick one's 90 days. Ordinarily, you're talking about 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's for a more significant construction defect case.
Yeah. Do you see kind of the similar?
I think that there can be slight differentials depending. A lot of construction contracts, as you know, have arbitration clauses. The under home improvement contract, it has to be in all caps and initialed by the parties to be enforceable by the contractor. But arbitration can be substantially less expensive than litigation and substantially quicker. So that's why it's in the AIA contracts for architects, and it's in a lot of construction contracts. In my opinion, it's a good way to go. I've written a book on arbitration. I know a lot about it. And I think overall, some people feel reluctant to give up their right to a jury trial, but it's designed to be quick. Generally, it'll be a lawyer as the arbitrator, but it can be a structural engineer. I've got some good results from structural engineer arbitrators. that's one thing homeowners can do to cut down on the costs, is make sure there is an arbitration clause. And I'd say in construction contracts, probably 7 times out of 10 there is. The other thing that you should do is, in a home improvement contract, they're required to tell you whether they have liability insurance, and if they do, what the name of the company is. They should ask to be named as an additional insured. And the reason that's important, not just get a certificate, is that if the contractor vanishes, goes south, disappears, and you make a claim with an insurance company, unless you're an additional insured, they're not going to listen to you. The claim is going to have to come from the contractor. So that's another thing that you can do to protect yourself.
That's honestly, that's a really good point, because we do it a lot. It's so prevalent in HOAs, for example. Every HOA we ever worked for, they're like, name you as additional insured. But I don't know that we've ever had a client, maybe 5%, sub 5% of our clients have ever asked to be. And we happily do it. I mean, it's easy. My office knows the process.
But you have to understand, HOAs are a lot more sophisticated than the average homeowners, who won't even ask about insurance. Again, I mean, they passed these draconian laws. I think that contractors are probably the most regulated industry in my experience. And the reason for that is because there's so many problems and so many screw-ups. And so they passed laws, but they're not making sure that the laws be followed adequately, in my opinion.
One of the things I see all too common with homeowners, and I'd love to get both of your opinions on this, is I'll come into a project and there'll be some small issues. Okay. There'll be, let me think of an example. One of them was I did a project for a client, and they had a general contractor put in a huge driveway. It was a multifamily home. They did some gutter work. They did all these different projects. And so the concrete had already started cracking slightly, and it was only about 3 months old. And I looked at this and I said, there's no way they compacted the subbase. There were signs of a bigger issue down the road. And the homeowner at that point was so happy to just be done with the bad contractor, the bad experience, that they're like, you know what, I'll worry about it later. And I basically said to them, I said, look, I feel as though, and this is not my profession, that's why I'm bringing it up. I said, I feel as though if you attack this now, you'll have more leverage, because in 3, 4, 5 years, as things start to leak or fail or crack, as time moves on, it's less and less likely that you'll be able to essentially to validate some of the concerns that I had brought forth, to potentially have some recourse. What is your feelings on that? Because I feel like, and I guess we'll start with you, Gerald. I feel like I see that so often with homeowners. We're like, I just want to be done. I'm just done.
Yeah, I see that. But one of the problems that you raised is, now it's a double-edged sword. Now you're on notice of the condition. So if you wait 3 to 4 years, they're going to say, well, you knew about it then. You blew your statute of limitations. You should have stepped up sooner. But then again, if you step up too soon, there's no damage yet. So you don't have a claim. You only have a potential claim. So that's where, I mean, we will sometimes advise clients to, why don't we wait a year? Let's see what happens.
Wow.
Let's see if there really is a problem. So, the answer is, yes or no. It really depends. If it deviates from plans and specifications, now you have that claim. You can bring that now before there's any damage. But if it's just a pure negligence claim and you just think this thing is going to fail eventually, well, until it fails, there's no claim. And that's California law. And I'm going to circle back and disagree with Steven just a bit on the arbitration. I do not recommend that a homeowner agrees to an arbitration provision.
Okay.
It can be far more expensive, significantly more expensive than a superior court trial. And most of the arbitrators are handpicked, and they work for the building industry. And they work for the insurance companies because, Mr. Smith, the homeowner, he may have one claim in his life that goes to arbitration. Larger contractors and insurance companies who mandate that the arbitration provision be in their clients' contracts, they're bread and butter to these arbitration companies, whether it's the American Arbitration Association or JAMS or any of the big arbitration companies. They're in the pocket of big business, and homeowners are not big business. So you can always agree to arbitration down the road, but to make it mandatory up front, I disagree with that for a homeowner.
I love it. And that's why we wanted differing perspectives. I think the goal is that there's no one size fits all. And the takeaway message here is knowledge is power. And that's even to what you just said about what I thought. I mean, that's really interesting. So it sounds like maybe the best thing to do for a homeowner, if they start to see some issues and I'm a contractor and I say, hey, I suspect that there might be a problem, is to consult an attorney and basically just understand their options. Because
Exactly.
that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. Yeah. And do you find mainly that you have to bring in a lot of expert witnesses, or what's the kind of the front end process for a homeowner if they're scared to be like, well, if I dip my toe, do I have to jump all the way in the pool, so to speak? Or
Not always. For most cases I'm involved with, 99% of them, I'm the first one out on the site to take a look before I bring in an expert and start running the clock with those guys. And we'll usually start with one expert who can work the whole building and help us pinpoint what might be the problem. And then we bring in, sub trades and specialty experts. You don't need to jump too quickly. That's another fear factor, that the homeowner suddenly, he's got a big bill and he's paying retainers to a lot of different people. It's just the way we handle it, go a little smoother. But yeah, it can get very expensive if, you start bringing in every trade to come take a look and dissect your house and start ripping it apart. You're at a point of no return.
yeah. What do you think, Steven?
Well, my feeling is, I think he's talking about primarily a construction defect case. Typically, if it's a construction defect case, it ain't going to go to arbitration anyway, because there's exemptions from arbitration for multiple defendants and those kinds of cases in many contracts. If arbitration wasn't working, the American Arbitration Association wouldn't be around for, probably 100 years, and the American Institute of Architects would not have standard arbitration clauses. I'm a champion of arbitration. I think it's a good way to go, and I don't find that there's a lot of industry arbitrators. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I've done probably thousands of arbitrations. Especially on a smaller case for a homeowner, I think it's a good way to go. Now, keep in mind that a lot of construction defect cases, a lot of them arise from water intrusion. And especially in California, where it doesn't rain that often, it can be a long time before you discover that. And that's why for a latent defect, an unknown one, there's a 10-year statute of limitations. It's not uncommon for these cases to arise 9.5 years down the road, when all of a sudden a condo complex or a home starts to leak. And then they have to go and they have to find out who their contractor was. Are they still around? Do they have insurance involved? Is there more than one insurance company? So it's important when you do construction, to retain your records. And I've got in the practice of, rather than keeping a bunch of paper, just scan stuff and put it on a flash drive or DVD and keep it.
If you made me think of something really, really powerful here. So if I'm a homeowner, and let's say there's something small that I can see, I find out. Let's say that we're remodeling a kitchen and I find out they're putting in the wrong appliance, and I'm able to catch that. But I go, you know what? This is what I can see, and I was lucky enough as a homeowner to catch that, but I think they're doing other things. How would you recommend, in your eyes, that a homeowner proceed with that kind of gut inkling of, I found something they did wrong, and where there's smoke, there's fire, they might be doing other things? What would you say is the first kind of step in that?
Whether you're going to a contractor, lawyer, or doctor, if there's a red flag, get a second opinion. A contractor isn't going to charge you much to come out and look at something. The only problem is that if you have a contractor come out and look at the work, they have an economic incentive to say that there's something wrong. So you need to make sure that the person that coming out is in fact reputable, and you may actually need a third opinion for that effect. If there's a designer on the project, like an architect, they can be asked to do something called construction supervision or construction administration. And they can come out for two purposes. Number one, to make sure that the work conforms to the contract. And number two, to make sure that the percentage of completion that the contractor says it is really bona fide, and that the contractor is entitled to be paid for that percentage of work.
Do you think that with COVID, have you noticed, Gerald, a certain type of issue more prevalent? Have you noticed that there's more of a certain, problem with contractors? Because what I'm seeing from kind of boots on the ground is that I'm seeing more contractors kind of jumping in the ring. I'm seeing a lot of new licensed contractors. I'm seeing a lot of contractors rather, that are doing work that isn't their bread and butter. They're doing things that are kind of peripheral services, but there's so much money to be made. What's the downstream effect on that in your eyes? What do you see?
Well, I'm seeing two things. I'm seeing that, and then I'm also seeing with the LA City and LA County rules on how many people can be on a job site at a given time, that you're getting a lack of coordination, and trades need to follow one after another. And if you can't have two people on the job at the same time, sometimes you need two sets of eyes to see something and make sure that the waterproofer's doing his work and the tile guy's following properly and they're on the same page moving forward. They can't always do that in conjunction because they're off the job. But yes, and I am seeing, people jumping in as contractors. There's money to be made right now. One thing I'm going to agree with Steven on is the project administrator.
Only one thing?
Well, more than that, but the project administrator, because sometimes a homeowner is reluctant, if not ignorant as to what their rights are in dealing with their contractor. And when a contractor says, I need my next draw, a homeowner may just say, well, I guess I owe you, versus an administrator who comes in just for that purpose, doesn't cost a lot of money, who can, like Steven said, what is the percentage work completed? What is this money going towards? I need lien releases from the subcontractors. Do a lot of the things that a homeowner doesn't know how to do, or frankly is just kind of reluctant to speak up in the face of their contractor because, they just want their job done and, they got their fingers crossed.
What are you noticing, Steven?
Well, I don't know how to break this to you, but I think it's going to get worse. The legislature just enacted a law this year for that, whereby lesser qualified contractors can do residential work, and it's called a residential remodeling contractor, and it's Business and Professions Code 7057.5. They can't do all of the things that a general contractor can do, but they can do many of them. And because of the fact that they don't have to have the same capacity, things could actually wind up getting worse.
Do you notice that? And I would love both of your perspectives on this. Do you see? I've done an immense amount of research on this topic, but I would love to see what you think. And I guess we'll start with you, Steven. Do you see that most of these issues are around general contractors, or do you see that it's a contractor, let's call it a specialty trades or a subcontractor to a homeowner? Or do you see that it's more one versus the other?
I get a lot of calls through my website all the time, and I'd say it runs the gamut. You can have anything from an unlicensed contractor to a subcontractor contracting directly with a homeowner, but the subcontractor doesn't know that they have to use a home improvement contract. Get a lot of homeowners calling because they're in a fee dispute with the contractors, and the first thing that a contractor can often say is, okay, this is a change order. That's contractors' bread and butter, and they accept that, but homeowners don't know that a change order can follow if there's a deviation from the design or the contract. And contractors are not really good about educating people on that. When they do educate them and say this will cost more or less, they don't tell them what the impact is going to be on the timeline of the project, and that could take longer if they go that way. So that's another issue that comes up all the time. But mechanics liens get people's attention, and I get a lot of calls. Hey, this contractor, I fired him and or he abandoned the project, and he's threatening to lien the project. Happens all the time.
What are you seeing?
Most of my work is defect work, post-construction, but I do see a lot of mechanic lien issues.
Yeah.
Most of the ones I'm seeing are improper. They're for work. I've seen contractors bill for work to be performed, which is illegal. And then when that bill isn't paid, they lien on that. And so, let's say the lien's $100,000, maybe only $30,000 of it is for work performed.
Wow.
But the homeowner doesn't know that. The homeowner it prompts them to write the check and get that lien released. It's a powerful tool, and it's abused often.
No, that makes sense. If there's one, we'll wrap here with kind of one last question. If for a homeowner doing research, let's talk about maybe 2 or 3 of the most powerful kind of research tools or techniques, whether it's referrals or a certain question to ask or a certain thing to look for on the contract. Because what I find is a lot of homeowners are, there's so much knowledge. It's kind of like this ignorance is bliss thing, right? And then when you have this awakening, you're like, wow, I actually really need to know this stuff. Like there's a financial gain, there's a longevity gain. There's so many reasons why as a homeowner, really understanding this process is beneficial. Then you go into this phase of almost stasis where it's like, well, there's so much, where do I start and how do I navigate this? What are a few of, we've talked, in ad nauseum about kind of some of the different areas, but if they were to prioritize, if they were to dip their toe in and say, all right, I'm going to be a confident homeowner, I'm going to master this process, where would you say they should start? Not finish, but just kind of get the ball rolling in terms of research or what to know.
Well, going online and trying to research the law could be, an endless chore that these guys can get into. And it's sort of like when, non-doctors try to figure out what their symptoms are. You're staying up all night looking at something.
Yes.
So you don't want to do that. I think once you've narrowed to the point that you're comfortable with your contractor, you want to get referrals and you want to be able to go see their work. I think that's the prime thing you need to do. If a contractor won't give you a referral, that's a red flag. And if the referral, they should be happy. They should say, come on, come see my job. Come see the swimming pool. It looks great. We love it. Matt's a great guy. If you're not getting that kind of response, you might want to think about who you're dealing with. But in terms of learning the law, that's a tough job for the homeowner to do. But there are plenty of consumer groups they can turn to. And the Contractors License Board does provide some available information online where they can learn not only about the contractor, but about contracting laws, about the home improvement contract, about what, some of the do's and don'ts that they should try to make sure don't happen.
Love it. I love it. Mr. Lovett, Steven.
That's kind of redundant.
Yeah.
But in any event, I completely agree. There are a lot of good, it's not really as entailed as it may sound to educate yourself. First of all, you can just Google Home Improvement Contracts California, get a lot of information. Contractors Board at the website that I previously gave, www.cslb.ca.gov, click on consumer, and there's like all sorts of contractors information, home improvement information. In addition, the California Board of Architecture has a brochure on home improvement contracts. So it's really not that difficult to educate yourself. There's not a lot of law. There's just things to look out for. Contractors Board publishes a very simple checklist on things to look out for. It's not very complete, but it gives you some ideas.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we've dropped some words of wisdom for our listeners here on how to navigate this process.
Thanks, man.
Thanks.
Thank you.